Not all journeys begin with thunder. Some start in quiet moments beneath starry skies, where forgotten paths wait to be discovered. If you enjoy gentle quests and soft magic, like and subscribe for more bedtime stories. The great domes of Kael'mir's library loomed like forgotten mountains, veiled in vines and silence. Once it was the heart of the known world, a place where kings sought truth and beggars found wisdom in the rustle of pages. But now, the only sound was wind slipping through broken windows, fluttering loose parchment like the feathers of a dying bird. Elara stood before its arched gate, fingers brushing the cool iron that bore the insignia of the Order of Scribes, an open eye overlaid on a quill. The symbol no longer meant anything to the people of Ethera, not since the silent fade descended. They couldn't read it, not even remember what it once meant. But Elara could still hear the whispers. She pressed her palm against the metal, and a sigh threaded into her mind, ancient ink breathing its final words. Memory, it moaned. We are memory. Elara's heart clenched, not in fear, but in mourning. Books were dying, stories vanishing from the skin of the world. Soon, there would be nothing left but blankness, even in thought. And she alone stood between that void and the final breath of history. She stepped into the ruins, her soft boots stirring ash and petals alike. Sunlight broke through shattered stained glass, casting colored ghosts on cracked stone. Shelves drooped under the weight of unread tomes, spines slumped and blind. Elara moved among them with reverence, touching bindings, listening, not with ears, but with that odd gift she'd never learned to name. She called it ink song. Each book held a residue, a murmur only she could perceive, a cadence, a tone, the shivering outline of a vanished voice. She could never read them in the old way, not truly. But she could understand. Words came to her as colors, as distant chimes, as warmth rising behind her eyes. Ink psalm. She reached for a thick ledger covered in wax dust. Its psalm was faint, brittle, but still there. Chronicle of the obscured moon, she whispered, and the name lit in her mind like an ember in snow. The book trembled beneath her fingers. Gone, it whimpered. He took the moon from the sky. Her breath caught. Each whisper carried echoes of something older. And lately, they were fading faster. Elara wasn't alone in her gift. Or rather, she hadn't always been alone. Once, there were dozens in the quiet guild, those who had retained fragments of meaning through the fade. Most lost their ability within months. Others went mad trying to chase voices no one else could hear. Only Elara had remained steady, her mind a sanctuary against the unraveling. She was 15 when the fade first touched the land, erasing the written word from every mind. The scholars screamed. The poets wept blood. The first libraries burned, not from flame, but from despair. People forgot what books were. Even now, 10 years later, she watched them use torn pages as kindling, not knowing they burned the last lullabies of their ancestors. Elara had traveled across crumbling cities, collecting what remained, storing them here, in Kael'mir's forgotten vault. The library was not safe. Decay, scavengers, and whispers of dark things that hunted knowledge. But it was sacred. It had to be. For within its bowels, beneath the dust and shadows, a path began. A path that pointed her to the one place untouched by the fade, the sunken city of Virenhal. That name, Virenhal, carried weight in her soul like a bell submerged in oil. It was not a place found on maps, not anymore. But one whisper, from a dying scroll, had sunk it into her bones. Beneath the sea, where memory sleeps, find the cipher. That was the word that had haunted her dreams, cipher. A key, a construct, a relic of impossible magic. If it existed, it held the power to reverse the curse, to awaken the silenced world. But how could she find it? Virenhal had vanished before the fade, its spires swallowed by the breaching sea, its people lost to myth. Still, Alara had traced threads through broken manuscripts, pieced together clues from lantern songs and dream-etched maps. She had a direction, a purpose, and a name, the cipher of echoing souls. She didn't know what it looked like, nor who made it. But she knew one truth: if she didn't find it soon, there would be no one left who could even remember what was lost. Her preparations were nearly complete. She returned to her chambers deep within the library's lowest sanctum, where the walls still hummed with quiet echoes. Lanterns flickered above shelves of bound parchment, each marked with sigils only she could feel. Maps, fragments, theories, an entire journey stitched together by instinct and whispers. At the center of it all lay her satchel, a faded pack lined with threadbare velvet, worn smooth by years of travel. Inside were her tools, a quill carved from phoenix bone, blank vellum that sometimes bled words when warmed by firelight, a compass whose needle pointed to memories, not directions. She added one final object, the last book, a tome with no title, its pages blank to all eyes but hers. It recorded her thoughts, her fears, her songs. It spoke only when she bled into it, a drop from her fingertip each night. "The fade is faster now," she whispered, pressing her hand against the cover. "I hear silence where there was once symphony." The book pulsed faintly. "Then go," it whispered, "before silence swallows you too." Alara emerged from the sanctum at twilight. A storm gathered in the east, coiling like ink across the sky. She stood atop the library's highest balcony, watching the wind sweep across the dead city below. Rooftops slumped, vines tangled through chimney teeth, and the old statues of scribes had crumbled into faceless shapes. But far in the distance, a flicker of movement stirred, a caravan cresting the dunes. Traders. Scavengers, perhaps. She shrank back, heart quickening. Anyone could be dangerous now. Some hunted books to sell as exotic fuel. Others hunted her. The Guild of Nullers, fanatics who believed that the fade was a blessing, not a curse, had put a bounty on her head. Unmaker of unmaking, they called her. She waited, breath held, until the figures passed without turning toward the library. Still, she knew time was slipping. If the guild found her trail, they would stop her quest before it began. And so, with the wind keening in her ears, she descended the spiral stairs for the last time. The journey had begun. Her route would take her first to Drossen's Hollow, a ravine village where stone singers still echoed hymns into the cliffs. There, she hoped to find passage through the Raven's pine tunnels, which legends claimed once touched the edge of Virenhal's waters. But between here and Drossen lay the Weeping Barrens, a stretch of land haunted by ghost light and sink storms. The name wasn't metaphor. Rain fell upward in the barrens. Stones wept black ichor. And voices followed travelers at night, begging them to turn back in tongues no longer spoken. Alara wrapped her scarf tightly, checked the compass again, and began the long descent from Kaelmer. She left no markers behind. Not because she feared pursuit, but because she knew no one would follow. She was the last whisperer, the last thread. Each step she took felt heavier, not from doubt, but from the weight of every untold story she carried in her bones. The first night beneath the open sky was merciless. Stars winked like forgotten punctuation, and the moon hung above like a watchful scribe. Elara made camp between two leaning stones, lighting a fire with dried vellum scraps that no longer whispered. She hated burning them, but survival demanded it. As she warmed her hands, she took out the last book and offered a droplet of blood to its spine. Words bled onto the page in spirals. Night 1. Sky clear. Fear quieter than expected. Then it added without her prompting. They watched you from the ridge. Her head snapped up, scanning the darkness. Nothing. No sound but wind. Still, she didn't sleep that night. She sat upright, hand on the phoenix quill, waiting for silence to break. By dawn, the barrens stretched before her like the cracked hide of some long-dead beast. The wind was still, unnatural. She passed stones carved with names worn too smooth to read. The air tasted like ash and old ink. And then, around midday, she found the first echo. It wasn't a book. It was a tree. Charred, hollowed, standing alone, and inside its bark, words glowed faintly, etched in ink fire. Here he wept, it read. Here the first sorrow was born. She touched the bark, and a sound pierced her skull, a sob ancient and hollow. She staggered back. This was no mere remnant. It was a memory well. Someone, perhaps the creator of the cipher, had left this as a marker. A map not made of directions, but of grief. She pressed her hand to her heart, steadied her breath, and pressed on. The next sign came at dusk. A flock of ink crows, their feathers glinting with script, passed overhead. Elara held still as they circled once, then scattered. One dropped a feather at her feet. She picked it up. No words, but it was warm, recently touched by magic. She tucked it into her book and continued. That night, the wind carried voices. 2 children, laughing, then screaming, then nothing. She nearly turned back. But the blankness at the edges of her mind was growing. The fade was tightening. She had no choice. She pressed onward into the dark. By the 5th day, her boots bled ink into the soil, literally. The fade was infecting the land now, not just minds. She woke with her fingers stained black, her dreams filled with weeping libraries and ink pouring from stone mouths. But then she crested a dune and saw them, the ruins of Virek, a forgotten outpost once devoted to map-making. Its towers were collapsed, but in the center, a globe still spun, very slowly, suspended by old spells. She approached, touched its equator. A voice spilled forth. Virenhal fell not into sea, but into sorrow. She whispered, Then sorrow is my compass. Elara left Virek at sunrise. Her path was now clear, to find the tears of the architect, the next sorrow marker. The world blurred around her. Fewer whispers now, more silence. But the book still spoke. 12 days remain before all thought ends. She closed it, heart cold. 12 days. 12 sorrows, perhaps. And at the end, the cipher. She prayed she would reach it in time. The weeping barrens behind her, Elara crossed into the thistle expanse. A wide, brittle plain where the air shimmered with invisible music and the ground cracked like old parchment beneath every step. The compass trembled now, not with direction but emotion. She could feel sorrow pooling beneath the earth like water beneath a frozen lake. Every few miles, she came across fragments, a child's toy turned to stone, a weathered scroll impaled on a rusted spear, or crumbling murals painted on cliffsides, barely visible but whispering songs of farewell. These weren't just artifacts, they were echoes. And each one tugged at her, urging her forward, guiding her to the next sorrow marker. On the 6th morning of travel, As the first golden mist settled over the horizon, she found it. A stone arch, standing alone in a ring of scorched flowers. It pulsed faintly, humming a dirge too low to hear. Alara stepped into its threshold. Her vision blurred. Reality bent. And then, the world turned inside out. She found herself standing in a vast chamber lit by candlelight, though no flame burned. The walls were carved from black salt, etched with symbols she recognized not from study, but dreams. Before her stood a single pedestal, and atop it, a crystal globe filled with swirling ink. A voice, not heard but felt, echoed from within. Sorrow the first, abandonment. Images flooded her mind, parents leaving a child on the steps of a forgotten monastery, a lover writing unread letters, a king turning from a crying soldier. Alara gasped, clutching her chest as the weight of 1,000 forsaken souls pressed into her ribs. She fell to her knees, and the globe pulsed brighter. "You must hold it," the voice said. "Only through burden can path be revealed." With shaking hands, she reached out and touched the glass. It burned cold, then hot. Her veins filled with liquid memory. When she opened her eyes again, she stood beneath the real sky, at the foot of the arch, and the globe was gone. But the sorrow remained, embedded now, a brand upon her spirit. The next days blurred. Food had lost its taste. Her dreams were no longer her own. She saw through the eyes of forgotten people, a boy watching his village fade into smoke, an elder clutching the ashes of a sacred book. She woke each morning with the ache of their grief, yet stronger somehow. The more sorrow she bore, the sharper her perception became. Colors deepened. The ink whispers became clearer. She began hearing entire sentences, not just fragments. "We are bound by loss," one book whispered, "and only through loss may we find truth." It was on the 10th day that she came upon the tear of the architect. It was not what she expected. No ruins, no relics, only a tree, standing alone in a field of black sand, its leaves made of paper. As she approached, one leaf drifted down, brushing her face with a whisper. "Second sorrow, creation unremembered." The tree wept ink. It oozed from its bark in long rivulets, pooling at its roots. Alara knelt and pressed her palm into the puddle. The ink climbed her skin like veins. She did not resist. The world dissolved around her, and she was inside a memory not her own, a man hunched over a desk, sketching impossible machines that folded time and breath, singing to himself in a tongue Alara had never heard. Behind him, a door slowly closed. No one ever entered again. The man grew older. His sketches grew desperate. The walls filled with symbols. And then, one night, he wept into a half-finished blueprint, whispering, "They won't remember me. Not even the cipher." Alara sobbed with him. When she awoke, the ink had dried on her hand, forming the shape of an open eye. The second sorrow had been received. And far away, the compass shifted. Virenhal was nearer now. Alara pressed on, moving faster now. With each sorrow gathered, her connection to the world, and what lay beneath it, deepened. She began to see trails, faint shimmerings in the air that hinted at paths long lost. By following them, she avoided sink storms and mere winds, storms of magical illusion that swallowed lesser travelers whole. On the 13th day, she entered the singing vale. It was eerily beautiful. Flowers made of glass chimed in the wind, and every step echoed like a distant bell. But beauty here was not safety. The vale was a maze of memory. She passed illusions of her childhood, her mother reading aloud, her first book, her last friend who could still remember how to write his own name. She nearly became trapped in those echoes, but the book in her satchel glowed hot, warning her. "Do not dwell. Remember, but do not live in memory." She ran, tears streaking her face, until the chiming faded. In her wake, petals turned gray. The third sorrow waited at the vale's heart. A fountain, shaped like a mouth, open in silent scream. Water did not flow from it, instead pages. Endless, fluttering pages that spilled across the ground and rose into the air like moths. Elara approached and knelt. A page brushed her hand. Sorrow the Third, Song Unsung. She felt it then, a world where music had once held power, where entire cities had sung their defenses, and lullabies could seal wounds. And now? Silence. Not even a hum. She inhaled deeply, then opened her mouth and sang. It was a melody no one had taught her, but that the fountain remembered. The pages slowed. The air held still. And then, gently, they folded themselves into the shape of wings on her back. Made of paper. Made of song. When she stood, the wings crumbled, but she felt lighter. As if the sorrow had taken something from her, but left a gift in return. Crossing into the drifts of fallow mist, the world began to warp more violently. Here, the fade was not passive, it attacked. Words unraveled in the air. Elara's thoughts turned to static. The compass wept ink. She wore a mask of wax-soaked cloth to keep the mist from seeping into her lungs. Still, voices cried out, some familiar. The voice of her mother, asking her to stop. The voice of the Nuller Guild, chanting her death. The voice of her own doubt. She had to tie herself to her own memories, repeating names of books she had saved, cities she had seen fall, and each sorrow she had embraced. After 3 nights, the mist lifted, and she collapsed, barely alive. But the 4th sorrow was waiting, a cave with walls covered in handprints. Sorrow the 4th, touch denied. The echoes showed her lovers never embraced, children never held, all forgotten through fear. Elara pressed her hand to the wall. A single handprint lit up. Hers. The cave sighed. You remember. And then, it crumbled behind her. Elara's body bore signs of her journey now. Her hands were ink-stained and trembling. Her eyes glowed faintly in moonlight. The book in her satchel grew heavier with each sorrow recorded. And her heartbeat no longer matched her own, it pulsed to some deeper rhythm, something ancient. On the 17th day, she reached the Shattermere, a lake of liquid glass where time fractured in reflections. She saw herself, not just now, but younger. Older. Dead. Weeping. Victorious. She dared not drink, but she did kneel and whisper her name. The lake responded with images of the cipher, a wheel of light, a boy crying as he forged it, a great beast guarding it in sorrow. She wept, and the lake answered. Sorrow the 5th, legacy forgotten. A reflection rose from the water, herself, but eyeless, voiceless. She embraced it. It vanished. And the path revealed itself again. As she neared the coast where Virenhal once stood, the land grew brittle. Grass turned to dust. Trees leaned as if ashamed. She passed temples melted by unspoken regret. And then, upon a cliff of white bone, she found the 6th sorrow, a wind harp, broken. Strings snapped. She sat beside it and listened. Not with ears, but soul. And it whispered, Sorrow the 6th, truth denied. Memories rose of scholars silenced, of children told their dreams were nonsense, of the cipher's creator screaming in a room no one believed existed. Elara found a thread of her phoenix quill and rest-strung the harp. It played 1 note. That was enough. That night, she met another soul. Not human. A creature made of folded stories, literal pages woven into sinew and bone. It called itself Colthex. Not a guardian, not a guide, just a remnant. You walk the 12. Few survive 6. It circled her, curious. You do not crack. Why? Elara said simply. Because I listen. Colthex grinned with pages and handed her a single line. The 7th sorrow sleeps where water meets sky. Then it was gone. She etched the line into her book, grateful for the warning. The sea greeted her with a groan, a vast expanse of gray. No ships. No birds. Just fog and the outline of something beneath. Virenhal. She had made it to the edge of myth. But to reach the city, she would need to pass the Drowned Gate, a ritual she had no map for. She set camp and meditated beside the crashing waves, waiting for the sea to offer its sorrow. At midnight a tide of ink rose. From it emerged a door of coral and bone. She stepped through. The water did not drown her. It remembered her. And as she descended, she saw the shape of the seventh sorrow approaching, the soul unburied. Thousands of faces drifted in the deep, those who had died forgotten, their stories unwritten. Elara wept for them, and they opened the way. Virenhel called to her now, and the cipher pulsed beneath her feet. Virenhel opened like a wound beneath the sea, a city carved from memory, wrapped in silence, breathing sorrow through ancient stone lungs. The coral gates behind Elara shimmered closed, leaving only inklit water and the flickering ruins ahead. Columns draped in barnacle script loomed on either side of the sunken boulevard, their etchings still faintly pulsing. Strange fish flickered past like living punctuation, and Elara floated through the drowned streets with her limbs slowed by gravity's forgotten cousin. Yet even here, under fathoms of sorrow and time, the books whispered. The city wasn't dead. It dreamed. She passed doorways encrusted with glass teeth, staircases leading nowhere, and fountains that flowed with ink instead of water. Then she saw it, etched on a collapsed archway. Virenhel, City of Remembering. The name struck her ribs like a chime. Not forgotten. Remembered. Somehow, the city had resisted the fate not by denying sorrow, but by keeping it. Bottling it. Living in it. That meant the cipher was close. Perhaps at the center of all remembering. Elara gripped the satchel to her chest and followed the song of drowned pages deeper into the hollow heart. The deeper she went, the more the city changed. Light came not from flame or sun, but from thought, her own and others. Every time she remembered something with pain, the world lit slightly. A hallway blinked into view when she recalled her father's face before the fade. A spiral staircase shimmered into being when she thought of the first time she heard a book weep. Memories shaped this place. And it judged. One corridor nearly collapsed when her focus faltered. Another sealed entirely when doubt gnawed at her certainty. To proceed, she had to remember fully, not just people or facts, but the feeling of memory, the ache of it. She clutched the last book tighter and let it speak for her. I remember rain in the courtyard. I remember the last breath of the fable of Fireglass. I remember watching my brother forget my name. Each spoken truth carved another step into the path. She was building her own road with grief. Eventually, she reached the Library of the Drowned, a cathedral-like structure built from shells and stained blue glass, its domes bloated with pressure. Doors of bone opened to her unbidden. Inside, the shelves did not stand in rows but floated, twisting pillars of text that spiraled in slow dance. Each book emitted soundless notes, and the harmony of thousands formed a sorrow symphony that vibrated in Elara's bones. She drifted through, hands outstretched, the ink song stronger than ever. For a moment, she lost herself in it. Words bloomed in her mind, ancient tongues she'd never learned but now somehow understood. We were never meant to forget. We were never meant to only remember. Then came a pause in the melody, a breath in the sea. A presence stirred. From between the shelves, a figure emerged. Tall. Hooded. Robes stitched from scrolls. Its face was a mask made from the covers of burned books. It bowed. You carry sorrow, it intoned. Therefore you may pass. The figure introduced itself as Maleth, keeper of the echoing vault. Neither alive nor dead, it explained, but suspended in remembrance. It was once a human scribe, but like the city, it had become something more, woven into the story of the cipher itself. The vault lies ahead, Maleth said, its voice like the rustling of fire-damp pages. But sorrow alone cannot unlock it. You must answer. Elara followed Maleth through a gallery of glass statues, each one depicting a soul caught mid-scream, mid-laugh, mid-silence. These were the echoing, Maleth explained. Those whose stories were too loud to forget, yet too painful to keep. Elara paused at a statue of a child holding a melted quill. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. The sorrow whispered it all. They reached a door made from petrified vellum. 12 keys were carved into the lintel, one for each sorrow. You have 7, Maleth said. The rest await in the archive. Elara stepped through. The archive of echoing souls was not built in one plane. It spanned levels, timelines, even emotion. As Elara moved, the corridors rearranged. A hallway of grief led to a room of rage. A stairwell of nostalgia dropped her into a crypt of love. She navigated using instinct, letting the book and the sorrow in her blood guide her. The eighth sorrow found her in a chamber made of mirrors. Each reflection showed her as she might have been, a queen, a tyrant, a child still cradling books. In the center, a mirror showed her now, tired, changed, still seeking. It whispered, "Sorrow the eighth, self undone." Elara touched the mirror, and her reflection cracked. But instead of breaking, it stepped forward and embraced her. She shivered. When she turned, a door had appeared behind her. The journey continued. The ninth sorrow did not wait passively. It hunted. Elara entered a chamber of wind, soundless yet fierce, and saw it, a creature made of blank pages and silence, shaped like a wolf with eyes of dark ink. It circled her, growling. This sorrow was forgotten rage. Sorrow the ninth, the book breathed. Justice unanswered. She understood, this sorrow was not quiet. It was vengeful. The cipher's creator had cried out for justice, and no one had heard. She had to face this sorrow, not embrace it. Elara drew the phoenix quill and stood firm. The creature lunged, but she didn't strike. She spoke. She screamed all the injustices she had seen, all the forgotten cries she carried. Her voice filled the chamber. The wolf paused. It howled once, mournfully, then dissolved into pages. She collapsed, shaking, but alive. The 10th sorrow was more subtle. She found it in a garden that shouldn't have existed, lush, full of blooming books, butterflies made of poetry, trees with ink-veined leaves. A paradise. For a moment, Elara forgot her mission. She lay beneath a verse vine and closed her eyes. The wind smelled like paper and cinnamon. Then the sky darkened. The garden began to wilt. The butterflies dropped one by one, their wings crumbling. The voice of the book murmured, "Sorrow the 10th, beauty unshared." She opened her eyes and saw it clearly. This garden was a memory locked away, never read, never spoken. Its creator had died before it could be given to the world. Elara stood, gathered one flower, a stanza of perfect iambic verse, and whispered it aloud. The garden shone once more, briefly. A key appeared in her hand. Malith returned as she exited the garden. "You are nearly ready," it said. "But 2 more sorrows remain. The 11th is the city itself." Elara followed it to the heart of Virenhal, where a vast sphere of suspended water held a singular memory. They stood before it, and Malith explained. This was the day the city fell, not to water, but to grief. Elara stepped into the sphere. She was in the city's final hour. People weeping as their books turned blank. Scholars falling to their knees. Children asking why words didn't work anymore. And above it all, a tower of glass where the cipher was last seen. She heard the voice of its creator. "If I can't save them, let them remember. Even in silence." And then the city sank, not from collapse, but choice. It buried itself to preserve what remained. "Sorrow the 11th, Malith whispered. "Sacrifice remembered." Elara emerged changed. Her body felt heavier, her breath filled with echoes. The keys she'd earned glowed along her spine, now etched into her skin as runes. She could feel the final sorrow calling. Malith led her to a chamber with no floor, no ceiling, only a platform and the cipher itself. It floated in the center, a sphere of shifting text and silver threads, pulsing with heartbeat rhythm. "To unlock it," Malith said, "you must offer the 12th sorrow. One not given, one born." Elara stepped forward. What sorrow had she not known? She reached into herself, into her memories, her silence, her guilt. And there it was. Loneliness. Not just hers, but the world's. The loneliness of knowledge unused, of stories untold. "Sorrow the 12th," she whispered, echoes unheard. As she spoke it, the cipher reacted. threads unwound. Words poured from it like water from a broken dam. The platform shook. Malus stepped back, bowing. You have remembered what the world forgot. You have spoken what silence buried. The cipher opened, and inside it was not a device, but a heart. A literal, beating heart made of parchment and ink. Elara reached for it. The moment her fingers touched it, her vision exploded. She saw the fade, not as a curse, but as a defense. The creator of the cipher had caused it, yes, but not to destroy. To protect. The world had been unraveling in a war of knowledge, a battle of ideas turned lethal. The cipher had buried memory so the world could heal. But the sorrow never faded. And now, it could finally be resolved. The heart sank into her chest. Her veins burned. Her mind lit with stories never hers. She screamed, but not in pain. In recognition. Every forgotten tale, every song, every truth, the cipher gave them back. She became the archive. She became the voice. Malith knelt. You are the vessel now. The vault unsealed. Light poured out, flooding Byronhall. Elara rose, lifted by memory itself. Her wings of song reformed, bright, blazing, eternal. The fade above the surface cracked. She could hear it. All the voices of the world gasping as the words returned. Books reigniting. Names remembered. The silence dying. But her journey was not done. The cipher had returned knowledge, yes. But sorrow remained. It always would. Elara now bore it not as a burden, but as a balance. A key to keep the world whole. She rose through the sea, through the breach, through the veil of sorrow. The surface greeted her with a dawn unlike any other. And from the shore, voices cried her name, not in fear, but in thanks. Elara, the rememberer. Elara, the echo-bearer. Elara, who gave the world back its words. The wind that met Elara on the surface was different. It carried weight, not of moisture or dust, but meaning. Words whispered on it, clinging to the breeze like the first flakes of a long-awaited snowfall. A farmer dropping his hoe suddenly remembered his childhood lullabies. A child woke from sleep and uttered her long-forgotten grandmother's name. Across the land, people gasped as the weightless fog of ignorance began to lift. But it wasn't instant, nor painless. Knowledge, returned too suddenly, struck some like a thunderclap. Elsewhere, riots broke out as the truth of lost wars or erased betrayals came surging back. Cities reeled. Guilds fractured. Even joy had teeth when it returned through grief. Elara walked among it like a reed in a flood. She didn't shout. She didn't proclaim. But wherever she stepped, the words grew stronger. Her breath left trails of verse. Her tears sparked remembrance. The cipher inside her pulsed with a rhythm deeper than heartbeat, the rhythm of resonance. But though the fade cracked, it had not shattered. Its roots ran deep, and Elara knew her journey was far from over. She returned first to Kaelmir's library. Not to hide, but to begin the restoration. The doors had warped in her absence, the walls bowed with silence, yet as she entered, the old tomes stirred. Not fluttering, but sighing. As if breathing again. She touched the ledger she'd first revived weeks ago, Chronicle of the Obscured Moon. Its voice now rang clear. He took the moon to shield the stars. It whispered. He didn't steal. He saved. A nuance she'd missed before. Now she could understand, not just feel or interpret. The cipher granted fluency in sorrow. She didn't read the book. She conversed with it. And more than that, she healed it. The cracked spine sealed. The mold burned away like fog in sun. As dawn broke over the library dome, dozens more tomes began to glow. The ink returned to their veins. She was no longer just a listener. She was now a restorer. A weaver of echo. But Kaelmir was not a safe haven. Word of her return, and of the cipher's revival, spread faster than parchment to fire. And not all were grateful. The Nuller Guild saw it as an abomination. A reversal of sacred silence. Their assassins moved quietly, but Elara was no longer vulnerable. The wind warned her. The ink itself whispered when danger stirred. One evening, as she sang Restoration into a crumbling scroll, a dagger flew toward her chest. It froze midair. The air around it turned to words, and the blade unraveled into a story of its maker, a blacksmith whose daughter had died when a library collapsed. Even weapons mourn, the cipher murmured within her. Elara stepped through the ribbons of memory and found the would-be killer on his knees, weeping. I don't know why I hated you, he sobbed. I didn't even know her name until now. She said nothing. She placed a hand on his brow. Then remember her fully, she whispered, and never forget again. Elara knew she couldn't remain in Kael'mir. The library would endure, but her path now reached beyond books. The Fade, though weakened, still clung to the deepest corners of the world, places that had not seen ink in centuries. One such place called to her through a dream, the Emberforge, a temple city where language had once been etched into flame itself. Legend said its priests could ignite truth on pyres and read prophecy in smoke. But after the Fade, the fires went cold, and the last fire scribe, Mydra, vanished into the mountains with her soul burning. Elara now dreamed of Mydra nightly, her hands made of ash, her voice sealed behind blistered lips. Come, she mouthed, before my silence becomes the world's. The cipher ached within Elara's chest at the vision. She packed lightly. She told no one. And she walked west, toward the mountains whose names had been forgotten. The path to Emberforge cut through the wound plain, a cracked basin of obsidian and bone. Long ago, a fire war had torn the sky, and even now, heat rose from the earth in sudden, seething pulses. Elara walked with caution, for here the Fade had twisted not minds but landscape. Ruins rearranged themselves. Statues watched. One night she camped beside a pillar shaped like a screaming woman. By morning, it had turned into a tower of books stacked in molten stone. But the cipher guided her. Its threads hummed when illusions approached. And in dreams, Mydra whispered again. The 11th fire still flickers. Find it. By the 7th day, Elara stood before the gates of Emberforge. Or rather, what remained, half a city swallowed in cooled lava, its towers burned hollow, its script murals blackened into shadow. But one thing still shone, a brazier at the city's center, glowing with war fire. That was her destination. The city resisted her entry, not by force, but by memory. Her steps triggered echoes, voices of priests chanting names of stars, flames leaping from altar to altar. Then silence. As she moved deeper, the walls bled forgotten language, literally. Words oozed from cracks like molten ink, seeping along her path. The cipher responded with heat, burning beneath her skin. She followed the trail into the heart of the forge, where the great pylon once stood, a circular chamber lined with iron tomes, the ceiling open to the stars. And there, at its center, sat Mydra. Or what remained. Her body was cracked obsidian, her robes made of cooled ash. But her eyes glowed. Elara, she rasped. Daughter of resonance. Bearer of the 12th sorrow. I kept the fire alive, for you. And with her words, the last ember leapt to life. Mydra could not move, but her voice rang like bells struck in shadow. She explained that the Fade had reached Emberforge not through forgetting, but through suppression. The flame tongue, the sacred script of fire, had been silenced because it revealed too much. It told truths too raw, too dangerous. The Fade is not silence alone, Mydra said. It is fear of knowing. The priests had extinguished the truth to keep peace, and in doing so, had invited the Fade to fester. You must reignite the flame tongue, she said, but not with fire. With meaning. Elara stepped into the circle of the forge and drew the phoenix quill. The iron tomes trembled. She dipped the quill into her palm, drawing blood infused with cipher. Then she wrote, not in ink but in flame. Each stroke ignited letters midair. Words burned the darkness. And as they formed a single phrase, truth is not a wound, but a window. The chamber exploded with light. Emberforge lit once more. Towers blazed without consuming. Walls shimmered with remembered fire script. Across the land, those once trained in the flame tongue felt warmth in their bones, Forgotten verses danced in the air. The ashes of history stirred. Mydra smiled, her obsidian face cracking. "You've done it," she whispered. "But beware. Light casts shadows. And not all shadows wish to be revealed." As Emberforge revived, Elara felt a disturbance ripple through the cipher, a place to the south resisting the restoration. A place that fed on forgetting. The Hollow Spire. Said to be the birthplace of the first No Thought, a tower where no story had ever taken root. It had not been touched by the Fade because it had always been empty. Now it stirred. And for the first time, Elara felt something strange, the cipher recoiling. She left Emberforge on the seventh dawn, the wind behind her singing fire tongues. Mydra's final gift, a pendant of scorched crystal, guided her steps, revealing hidden truths when placed against the light. With it, Elara saw things as they truly were, wounds beneath smiles, lies stitched into banners, beauty buried under soot. The journey south was fraught with silent opposition. Roads vanished behind her. People forgot her mid-conversation. In one village, she was welcomed with feast and fire, and then driven out the next day, as though she were a stranger. The Hollow Spire was already reaching into minds, unraveling story before it could settle. By the time she reached its base, she could barely remember her own name. Only the book remained solid. Only the cipher's pulse kept her tethered. The Hollow Spire was not a tower of stone. It was made of absence. A column of sky where nothing should be. She entered not by doorway, but by forgetting how to remain outside. Inside, the world warped. Time frayed. Words turned to dust mid-sentence. The walls moaned with unspoken thoughts. And at its center stood a figure of glass, empty, flawless, hollow. The anti-scribe. The one who had begun the chain of silencing not by curse, but by choice. "I wanted peace," the figure said. "And stories bring pain. I silenced the world to save it from itself." Elara trembled. She understood now. The Fade had been born of sorrow, yes, but also of compassion twisted. "You feared pain," she said. "But sorrow is not the enemy. It is memory's proof." She held the cipher aloft. The spire shook. The anti-scribe attacked, not with blade or flame, but with forgetfulness. Elara's thoughts slipped. Her limbs moved without purpose. She screamed, but the sound dissolved. In that void, she saw her life unraveling, pages torn from her past, names crumbling. She fell to her knees. But the book glowed. The cipher burned. And from within came voices. Every story she had saved. Every sorrow she had embraced. They rose like a chorus. "Remember." The sound shattered the silence. The anti-scribe cracked. Elara rose, eyes blazing. She wrote one word in fire on the hollow chest. "Why?" The figure broke. The spire collapsed. And silence fled. When Elara emerged from the ruins, the land breathed. The Fade retreated fully now, its last roots severed. Story returned. Song soared. And Elara, no longer merely archivist, no longer just rememberer, was now something more. A guardian not just of knowledge, but of the balance between forgetting and remembrance. She turned her face to the horizon. More echoes waited. And she would answer every one. Elara walked eastward, guided not by map or dream this time, but by the cipher's hunger, a deeper thrum now, one that pulsed when she neared certain shadows, twitched in her veins like a divining rod sensing lost names. The spire's collapse had sent out a tremor of release across the land. For the first time in generations, people remembered whole stories, lineages restored, songs finished in full verses, wrongs finally given names. Yet something remained amiss. A weight, not of silence, but of buriedness. The cipher grew restless. It tugged toward a quiet corner of the world, known on old maps as the Vale of Meros, a cradle of verdant valleys and fog-choked meadows where once the first oral historians had sung the names of all living things. Now Meros was blank. Not cursed. Not ruined. Just forgotten by choice. There, the cipher whispered, lay the archive of breaths, a myth said to contain the original names of all living beings, lost when the silent fade began. Crossing into Meros was like stepping through a sleep. The trees bowed but made no sound. The birds flew in silent flocks. Even Alara's own footsteps seemed to dissolve before echoing. And yet, beneath that quietude, a thrum pulsed. The land remembered, dimly, stubbornly. In a clearing of lilies, she found stones shaped like mouths, weathered and moss-wrapped. They weren't carved. They had grown like that. Whisper stones, she realized. Used by the historians to anchor memory into the earth. She knelt and placed her hand to one. "Ilara," she said aloud. And the stone shuddered. A low, breathless voice returned her name, not as echo, but as recognition. The veil knew her. Not just from now, but from before. It showed her a flicker of a child with ink-stained hands, trailing behind a woman in gray robes. "Mother?" Ilara gasped. But the vision faded. The cipher blazed in her chest. Not all memories were ready to wake. At night she dreamed of breath. Not air, not wind, but names spoken like exhalation. The veil whispered them into her sleep: Miril, Salvin, Castrin. She woke with tears in her eyes, clutching the cipher close. These weren't just names. They were people, things, places, all unmoored by the fade, now drifting back into being. But memory, once lost, does not return gently. In the village of Nerith, half sunken in river fog, Ilara met the nameless. They wore plain gray robes and masks made of bark, and none of them spoke. Yet they followed her, moving as one body. At first she feared them, but soon realized they were drawn to the cipher's heat. One removed their mask. The face beneath was blank, no eyes, no lips, no nose, just a smooth surface like worn marble. Ilara shivered. They had not been born that way. The veil had unwritten them. "Let me give it back," she said softly. "Let me find your name." The nameless led her deeper, to the edge of a cliff shrouded in golden fog. There the wind sang, a melody with no words, yet each note etched longing into the marrow. Below, in a basin of mist, stood a structure unlike any Ilara had seen, a dome made of silver reeds and stone vertebrae, pulsing like a heartbeat. The archive of breaths. The place where names were once spoken into the world instead of pulled from it. She descended the slope, the nameless watching from above, unmoving. The entrance opened not with touch, but with breath. She stood before it, exhaled her own name, Ilara, and the reeds parted. Inside, sound returned. Like a reservoir bursting. The walls were carved in flowing script, lines forming not sentences but inhalations, the rhythm of speech made visible. And at its center sat a figure wrapped in veils of air, the keeper of breaths. The keeper was neither old nor young, male nor female. They were breath given form, shifting, ephemeral. When they spoke, the air itself curved. "Ilara," they said, "you bear the cipher of echoing souls. But it is incomplete." Ilara's heart raced. "Incomplete?" The keeper nodded. "The cipher remembers sound, but not origin. You hold resonance, but not naming." The archive, they explained, had once given names not only to things, but to meanings. To give a name was to bind a truth into reality. When the fade began, the first thing lost was not voice, but true naming. That is why the cipher still aches. Ilara approached the basin at the chamber's heart, filled not with water but swirling breath. "You must listen," the keeper said. "Not with ears. With self. Let it name you fully." She stepped into the basin, and the breath swarmed her. She fell, not downward but inward, into herself. Time unraveled. She saw her mother again, clearer now, Cerintha, an archivist turned wanderer. She had tried to protect the cipher but failed. She had fled to Meros, leaving Ilara behind in Kaelmir, where she hoped her daughter would be safe. Ilara saw herself as a child, clutching books like blankets, crying without knowing why. She saw the first moment she heard a whisper from a tome, and the moment her name burned into the margins of an unwritten scroll. "You were named before you were born," a voice said within the breath. "But only now can you own it." She felt her name shift, not just Elara, but Elareason. She who carries the chorus. The cipher pulsed like a drum. A new sigil etched itself into the book's cover, a spiral of breath surrounded by flame. The final language had joined. Naming. And Elara gasped as she returned to the archives chamber, kneeling in the basin, tears steaming from her face. The keeper stood over her, smiling. Now it is whole. The cipher can sing its last truth. Elara bowed. But it's not done, is it? The keeper nodded. Truth must be carried, not just revealed. They gave her a thread of light, a single strand of spoken breath woven into thread. Bind it to the cipher. Let it carry names long buried. When Elara touched the book's spine with it, the entire tome glowed, and for a moment she heard a choir of every name ever given. Mountains, rivers, lovers, lost children, fallen cities, and within them, one final voice. You are not the end, Elareason, it whispered. You are the beginning of memory's future. She left the archive walking upright, her steps trailing letters across the mist. And when she reached the nameless, their masks cracked. One by one, faces reformed. Eyes blinked. Tears flowed. I remember, someone said. My name was Halrin. And another. Tira. A dozen voices. 100. The veil exhaled. Yet peace was brief. The cipher, now whole, burned fiercely, too fiercely. In every town Elara passed, it stirred all memory. Not just gentle truths, but brutal pasts, sins buried for generations. In Corinth, an old lord collapsed as the names of those he betrayed returned. In Melos Hollow, an entire town wept for a forgotten massacre committed by their ancestors. Elara was no longer just a healer. She had become a reckoner. And the people didn't know whether to thank or curse her. Some begged her to stay. Others threw stones. The cipher pulsed, not in warning, but in insistence. It had revealed the past. Now it demanded something harder, reconciliation. How does a world rebuilt from memory move forward? That question haunted her more than any ghost. She returned briefly to Kael'mir to speak with Archivist Ryan, who had taken her place while she wandered. The old man's face had deepened with age, but his eyes lit up at the sight of her. The echoes travel far now, he said. Every corner sings. But some songs are discordant. He guided her to the Hall of New Ink, where scribes now wrote not just recovered lore, but future scrolls. For the first time in ages, we're writing forward, Ryan said. But even here, tension lingered. Some say we've remembered too much, he admitted. That peace lies in forgetting. Elara shook her head. Peace lies in understanding. She touched a scroll bearing her name. It pulsed warmly. She was now part of history. But she still had one final path. The Eclipsed Court, where the Fade had first been invited, not by curse, but by choice. The Eclipsed Court lay in the heart of the Mirrorlands, a realm of illusions and reflections where the nobility once ruled not by decree, but by narrative. They controlled history by curating memory, editing the past, trimming truths, gilding lies. The Fade had found fertile ground here, not through violence, but through vanity. Now the court was silent. Its towers mirrored nothing. Its fountains ran dry. Elara stepped through illusions of grandeur, ballrooms full of laughing ghosts, banquet tables rotted through. But beneath the surface, something watched. The memory scribe. The one who had first penned the contract with the Fade. Not for conquest. For order. She stood upon a dais of silver ink, her quill longer than a blade. You come to undo me, she said. But I only did what they asked. Elara did not answer with words. She opened the cipher. The memory scribe read it. Not glanced. Read. And as she did, she aged. Her gown fell to ash. Her quill snapped. All the things I silenced, she whispered. They were real? She collapsed. The court trembled. Its mirrors shattered, not with violence but with truth. As each shard fell, it revealed hidden memories, children locked away for inheritance disputes, rebellions framed as riots, love stories buried under duty. Elara walked through them, gathering each fragment. And as she reached the throne, she placed the cipher upon it. "No more lies dressed as legacy," she said. The court exploded, not in fire, but in restoration. The mirror lands cleared. Reflections returned. And across the world, the final fog lifted. Elara stood atop the court's highest spire as dawn broke. The sky rang with unsilenced voices. The cipher now pulsed gently, no longer seeking, merely singing. Her work was not over, but its shape had changed. She would no longer wander. Now she would teach. She would help the world hold memory not as burden, but as gift. Below her, cities stirred. Songs began. Names were spoken with reverence, not fear. Elarizen, she who carries the chorus, smiled, and turned toward the rising sun. There were still echoes to gather, still wounds to bind. But the silence was gone. The world had remembered itself. The world was awake now, but not at peace. As Elarizen descended from the ruins of the eclipsed court, the lands below surged with contradiction, beauty unearthed beside horror, truth blooming where denial once lay. Memory had returned not as balm, but as storm. In the city of Virith, long considered a jewel of civility, people rioted upon discovering their archives had been edited for centuries, entire families erased for politics or profit. In Sarim's dunes, wandering storytellers had gathered, chanting forgotten epics that caused listeners to faint from grief or joy. The cipher of echoing souls, now whole and bound with the breath thread, no longer whispered, it sang, a continuous low hum resonating through Elara's bones. It made her presence catalytic. Wherever she walked, memory awakened in its rawest form, not curated by historians or sages, but as it truly was, complex, wounded, and unrepentantly alive. In the coastal town of Meyerholt, fishermen abandoned their nets to scrawl names into the sand, those lost at sea, those forgotten by fate. The tide erased them each dusk, but they returned every morning. A memorial, living and restless. Elara passed through in silence, letting the cipher do its quiet work. But with each step, she grew wearier. The burden of knowledge was no longer just intellectual. It was emotional, spiritual. She carried not only her own memories, but fragments of those around her. Children who had never heard their mother's voice now dreamed of lullabies. Elders, long afraid of their pasts, wept openly as names they'd buried in shame returned with unrelenting clarity. And yet, amid the sorrow, something new emerged, the practice of harmonization. Groups gathered nightly, speaking their stories aloud in circle song, letting memory blend into memory until it formed something shared. Something survivable. Elara found herself drawn to these circles, not as a leader, but as a listener. In one, a baker remembered the name of the daughter she had given up during the fade. In another, a soldier remembered a lover whose death had been rewritten into myth. "He was not a hero," the soldier said through tears. "He was just scared. And kind." The circle did not judge. They sang his name back to her, gently. This was not the archivist's way. This was human remembering. Untidy. Personal. Alive. Elara added nothing, only watched as the cipher glowed steadily in her lap. Yet, in these moments, she felt it absorb not just sound, but healing. It was changing again. Not just a recorder of truth, but a weaver of reconciliation. Still, not all welcomed this. In the north, a new force was rising, the Order of the Hollow Tongue. The Order wore white robes stained with ink blots. They believed that the return of memory was dangerous, that truth without restraint would unravel society. The fade was not a curse, their messengers proclaimed. It was a mercy. They sought to silence again, not through magic, but through belief. Books were burned, whisper stones shattered. In Diratha's Hollow, a harmonization circle was attacked. Only 3 survived, one of whom fled to Elara with a torn page bearing the sigil of the Order, a mouth sewn shut by a quill. The cipher recoiled at its touch. "They undo what you restore," the survivor told her, voice cracking. "They speak not to listen, but to erase." Elara knew then, her journey had not ended with restoration. She was now a guardian, not only of memory, but of its freedom. And that meant she would need allies, and soon. She returned to Kaelmer one final time, gathering those whose voices had changed the world: Archivist Ryan, now frail but fire-eyed; Aneth of the Vale, who remembered birdsong with perfect pitch; Myram and Ral, twin scribes from the southern wards whose scrolls pulsed with emotion so deep they wept while writing. They met beneath the great dome, once cracked by silence, now ringing with footfalls and laughter. "The order rises fast," Ryan warned. "They do not burn books, they infect them. They rewrite pages with false echoes, songs with broken cadences." Elara opened the cipher and placed it upon the central dais. Its pages flared open to a blank sheet, and upon it, a map emerged, ink forming trails that glowed faintly, paths converging on one final point. "The deep choir," she said. "The original voice. If we reach it, we can let the world hear itself fully, once more." Legends of the deep choir told of a chamber buried beneath the singing canyons of Norvale, where every voice ever spoken had once gathered in harmony, a resonance so pure, it could mend broken hearts and shattered truths. No one had found it for centuries. But now, the cipher sang in that direction, and Elara knew it must exist. As they traveled, her fellowship grew: circle singers from the west, librarians from the east, wordweavers from the floating isles. They called themselves the Concord, not an army, but a chorus. Each bore a memory precious and terrible. Each vowed to defend remembering as a right. They traveled by songline, their paths marked not with stone but melody. And behind them, the world hummed. The singing canyons were unlike anything Elara had seen. Formed of layered crystal and sandstone, they vibrated with every breeze. Whispers echoed without origin. Laughter rang days after it was made. As the Concord entered, each member began to resonate, their own memories emerging in sudden sound: an old hymn, a childhood joke, a scream of grief. The cipher flared, absorbing and anchoring them. And in the canyon's deepest cleft, they found the threshold stone, a monolith veined with gold, its center a spiral of black glass. To pass through, they would each have to give one memory, not to forget, but to offer. Elara stepped forward first. She whispered her earliest echo, her mother's lullaby. The stone vibrated and opened. Beyond the stone lay silence, not like the fade, but the stillness before music begins. The chamber stretched wide as sky, yet close as breath. Floating in its center was the deep choir, not people, but voice itself, woven sound, braided harmony. Each note was a soul, and yet none were alone. The cipher levitated from Elara's hands and opened. Its pages unfurled like wings. A single thread of breath tied it to the choir, and for the first time, Elara heard it all. Every story, every truth. And the voices did not demand to be known, they invited. "Let the world sing," the choir said. "Let it harmonize, not erase." The cipher glowed golden. A final language emerged, choral resonance. The joining of truth and empathy. The Concord returned changed. Each member bore a melody within them that could not be replicated. They sang it into their homes, their cities, their circles. And people responded, not with awe, but with participation. Harmonization grew from practice to culture. Children learned songs of truth before letters. Elders spoke their pasts not with shame, but with guidance. And when the order of the hollow tongue came to extinguish it, they found not a resistance, but a choir. Voices layered together until no lie could penetrate. The cipher, now called the Canticle, sat within Kaelmer's great dome, open to all. No locks. No keepers. Just listeners. Elara walked the world once more, not to awaken, but to support. She became known as the Echo Keeper. In a village where silence returned due to drought, she taught them to sing their thirst. In a castle turned prison, she unlocked names the walls had swallowed. Not every place welcomed her. Some feared the vulnerability memory brought. Some tried to ban her name. But the canticle sang still, and where its tune reached, silence broke. Elara no longer needed to carry every name. Now, she taught others to hold them too. One day, at the edge of the whispering sea, a child approached her. "Are you the one who hears books?" they asked. Elara smiled. "Sometimes I think they hear me." The child handed her a stone with carvings, a new language, one made of spirals and beats. "We're making our own stories now," they said. Elara ran her fingers along the glyphs. They sang. Not with history, but with hope. She looked out at the sea, and for the first time in a long while, the cipher, now resting quietly at her side, did not stir. It was content. The world was remembering itself. And more importantly, it was riding forward. Night fell. Elara sat by a fire surrounded by strangers who already felt like echoes she'd known forever. They asked for stories, not of her journey, but of what came next. She laughed. "Then we must make them together." A hush fell. Then a low hum began. One by one, voices joined, shaping no single melody, but a chorus of endless variation. The fire crackled in rhythm. The stars pulsed above like listening eyes. And as Elara sang, not for memory, but for now, the canticle rested quietly nearby, pages fluttering in the wind. Not with urgency, but with peace. Elara awoke beneath the lavender sky of Indram's Reach, where constellations moved not with time but with memory. The stars above had started to rearrange into old celestial tales, forgotten heroes, lost kingdoms, ships that never returned. She lay on a bed of moss beside a smoldering campfire, the canticle curled close beside her like a sleeping creature. For the first time in months, she dreamt nothing. No echoes. No whispers. Just stillness. She stood slowly, the dawn light bending around her like a prism of unsung chords. The concord had long since dispersed, spreading harmonization across the land. Her journey should have felt finished. Yet she sensed an absence, not a silence imposed by the fade, but a deliberate gap. A memory that had never been forgotten because it had never been known. A story that was never written. It called to her, not as voice, but as an ache. The canticle began to hum again, but this was not its usual resonance. Its pages fluttered open unbidden, flipping backward, past the deep choir, past the ruin of the eclipsed court, past the archive spire. It halted on a blank page, one unmarred by ink, yet marked with the faint scent of petrichor and iron. As Elara traced her fingers over the parchment, a vision bloomed, not a place, but a moment. A boy alone in a candlelit room, surrounded by torn books and hollow-eyed dolls. He held a quill but wrote nothing. His lips moved in silence, and behind him loomed a mirror, cracked and blackened. A ripple shivered through the canticle. This boy, whoever he was, had never been remembered, not even by sorrow. And yet, he was the origin. The silent fade had not begun with malice or ritual. It had bled from him. Elara closed the book. She had a new path now, not to restore, but to meet the unspoken. To find a forgotten memory, she would need to leave behind even song. The canticle quieted in her satchel, as if bracing for stillness. Elara journeyed east, to the Pale Range, a glacier-choked expanse where memory was too brittle to hold shape. Locals there had never known names for their dead. They buried stones instead of bodies, and dreams never came. "We have nothing to remember," a woman told her, handing Elara a necklace of frost glass. "But we remember that we forgot." At night, Elara heard not echoes, but static. Whispers tried to form, but cracked apart before becoming words. Here, the fade had deep roots. She pressed onward, guided now not by trail or songline, but by a hunch, a pull, a wound. And when she came to the mirror vault, buried beneath a valley of ice-veined obsidian, she knew she was close. The vault was a dome of broken reflections, mirrors smashed into mosaics, each fragment showing faces Elara did not recognize. She stepped carefully, the crunch of glass beneath her boots deafening in the hush. At the chamber's center stood a chair. In it sat a figure, not boy, not man. Timeless. Face obscured by a veil of silver threads. He did not move. His chest barely rose with breath. Around him, the shards pulsed faintly, As Alara approached, she saw that none of the mirrors showed her. Only versions of the figure before her, twisted by agony, loneliness, longing. "You are the boy," she whispered. "The one who could not write." His head turned slowly. "I was the boy," he answered. His voice echoed with emptiness. "Now I am the blank." Alara knelt before him, her hand resting on the canticle. "Tell me your story," she said. "Not the world's. Yours." The blank shuddered. "There is no story. That was the wish." And Alara felt it, the raw ache of being unwritten. He had once been a child prodigy, gifted not with magic, but with understanding. He saw connections between people's words, could finish their thoughts, soften their pain. A boy of infinite empathy. And in a world twisted by war and ego, such clarity became a threat. He was locked away by those afraid of what he might reveal, his name erased from every scroll, his image banned from portraiture. In desperation, he tried to write himself into existence. But no ink could hold his truth. In his sorrow, a spell was born, not cast, but exhaled. A wish to not feel, not remember, not be. It spread, unnoticed at first. The fade was never a plague. It was a defense mechanism. A soul vanishing itself from a cruel world. Alara wept. Not out of pity, but because she understood. She had carried too many voices, too many histories. There had been days she wished to forget it all, too. But this boy, this blank, had succeeded. And in doing so, he had taken the world with him. "It wasn't your fault," she said. "You weren't wrong to feel. But you were alone. And no one helped you carry it." The blank looked away. "I asked the world to forget me, and it obeyed." Alara opened the canticle. Its pages turned slowly until it reached that same blank one. "Then let us write it now," she said. "Together." The canticle quivered. The ink rose like breath on the page. But the blank hesitated. "If I remember, the pain returns." Alara met his gaze. "Yes. But not alone this time." He reached forward. His fingers trembled as they brushed the parchment. Instantly, the chamber pulsed. The mirrors cracked anew, but this time, light spilled from the breaks. Visions burst into the space around them, a boy's laughter echoing in a tower library, his hands playing shadow puppets with siblings long gone, his voice reciting poetry no one had taught him. Alara saw the fullness of him, not the curse, not the consequence, but the being. The canticle sang, not with triumph, but with welcome. The blank page darkened, lines forming not in words, but in music. A score of a life once erased. The blank wept. "My name is Kalen." And as he spoke it, the air itself sighed. The fade shivered. Cracks formed in the veil that still lingered across distant lands. And far away, books long dead stirred on shelves. Alara and Kalen emerged from the vault as dawn broke across the pale range. The static was gone. Now the wind carried notes, halting and clumsy, but real. People in the nearby settlements looked up, startled by dreams they hadn't known they missed. Names returned slowly, as if thawing. And with each step Kalen took, the land remembered not just what had been lost, but what had been intentionally hidden. "I can't undo it all," he said. "Too much damage." Alara nodded. "But you don't need to undo. You just need to be known." Kalen did not speak again that day. But he sang. A single note, fragile as glass. And from that note, others came. Not his voice alone, but the voices of those awakening. Words spread faster than Alara expected. Not because of the canticle, but because of people. Harmonization circles now included Kalen's song. Children hummed it without knowing its origin. Scribes wrote new verses, blending his memory into the world's own tapestry. But in secret, the order of the hollow tongue grew desperate. Their vision, a world without discord, without pain, now unraveled. They had based their teachings on the belief that silence was purity. But Alara had proven that silence was a wound. The order's high speaker, Voris, declared the canticle heretical. She seeks to flood us with noise, he proclaimed. But it is noise that breaks the soul. He summoned his followers to the city of ash glass, preparing to seal the truth forever. A final confrontation was near. Elara did not march. She traveled slowly, letting the songs gather behind her. Kalen walked beside her, his presence no longer spectral but warm. The canticle pulsed in time with their steps. Villages joined the procession, circle singers, echo keepers, scribes, shepherds, children. By the time they reached Ash Glass, the road behind was alive with story. But Ash Glass was a dead city, its towers untouched by light, its gates adorned with silver masks. The order awaited. Voris stood on a platform of ashwood, his arms outstretched. "This is your last breath," he told Elara. "Speak now, and vanish into your own noise." She stepped forward. The canticle opened on its own. Not to a spell, not to a speech, but to a memory of Voris before the order. A boy named Ilvin, who once loved lullabies. The crowd watched in silence as the canticle sang his memory aloud, not as indictment, but invitation. Voris trembled. "Stop," he whispered. That's not me." Elara met his eyes. "It was. And it still could be." The order's ranks wavered. Some removed their masks. Some sang. Voris fell to his knees. "What if remembering breaks me?" he asked. Elara offered him her hand. "Then let it. And we will hold the pieces." And for the first time, Voris listened. Not with fear, but with grief. And the ash began to lift. That night the city pulsed with voice. Not victory, but resonance. No one was erased. Even the order found space in the harmony. Kalen sang once more, and the fade shattered, not with explosion, but with release. Books bloomed in libraries like flowers after rain. Dreams returned. Names stayed. The canticle closed softly in Elara's hands, its pages full. "Is it over?" Kalen asked. Elara smiled. "No. But now it can begin." And as stars realigned overhead, the world whispered, not in silence, but in song. In the days following the harmonization at Ash Glass, the world's breath returned. Not all at once, and not without pain, but like a tide, persistent, patient, pulling fragments of identity back into place. Songs once lost beneath centuries of silence drifted through city ruins. Families who had lived as strangers for generations now recognized shared lullabies. Elara walked the memory-woken roads not as a lone archivist, but as a steward of reconnection. The canticle no longer whispered with isolation, it pulsed with the rhythm of return. Yet amid this fragile joy, Elara felt the pressure of something deeper, an echo that did not belong to the past, but to the future. The cipher had yet to be found. Though the fade had been broken, reality still bore cracks. If left untended, new silences would form. The weave, the magical fabric of memory, was unraveling. To restore it fully, she had to descend into fire. The path led her south, to the Emberfold, a region shunned even by mapmakers. Long ago, it had been a library city, famed for its flame-bound tomes, books that remembered not only text, but emotion. But when the fade spread, the Emberfold burned itself from history. Now, travelers said the stones there still smoked with sorrow. Kalen, walking beside her with quiet strength, said little. Yet his gaze often drifted toward the horizon, as though sensing a part of himself still buried. The closer they drew to the Emberfold's edge, the hotter the air grew, not from fire, but memory. Forgotten griefs hung in the wind like ash. Elara wrapped the canticle in wool to keep it from igniting, but the book still shimmered faintly in her satchel, as if preparing itself. "We're going to the Forge of Thought," Kalen murmured. "Where memory is molten." They entered Emberfold through the Brazier's Gate, an arch of obsidian carved with names that flickered and vanished before they could be read. Inside, the city was a ruin of scorched towers and stone amphitheaters blackened by heat. But despite its silence, it lived. Ember spirits flitted through the streets, coals with wings, each carrying fragments of sound, sobs, laughter, lullabies. They weren't ghosts, Elara realized. They were impressions left behind by readers who once poured themselves into the flame-bound books. The canticle tugged gently against its wrappings, eager. At the city's center stood the hearth spire, a column of red glass that pulsed like a heartbeat. Kalen touched its base and gasped. "This is where the cipher was forged," he said. "Before it was hidden in the deep echo. We need to wake it." The hearth spire opened not with a key, but with a question. A voice, feminine, melodic, weary, asked from within, "What memory do you fear?" Elara stepped forward, placing a hand on the glass. "The moment I chose silence over truth," she said. The door flared, then unsealed. Inside was a spiral stair of ashstone, its steps burning yet cool to the skin. With each descent, Elara's memories surfaced, failures, cruelties she had endured and delivered, words she hadn't said in time. The deeper they went, the heavier her chest grew. Kalen, too, faltered. He wept at one landing, seeing the mother he had forgotten. But they pressed on. At the base of the spire lay a chamber of mirrors made not of silver, but of flame. In its center hovered the cipher, a lattice of light and shadow, turning slowly in the air, whispering not in sound, but emotion. It sang not what was, but what might have been. Elara reached for the cipher, and the fire reacted. Flames surged outward, testing her heart. She saw visions not just of her own life, but of countless others, histories that never came to be, joy extinguished before it could take root. It overwhelmed her, not with noise, but possibility. She staggered. Kalen caught her, and the cipher dimmed slightly, responding to his steadiness. "It's not a tool," he said softly. "It's a mirror of the soul. If we bring it into the world unbalanced, it will reflect our fractures." Elara steadied herself. "Then we must not use it to fix the world, but to listen to it." She reached again, this time not to control, but to witness. The cipher drifted into her palms, warm as memory. It did not burn. It harmonized. Carrying the cipher out of Emberfold, they found the city subtly changed. Towers unburned themselves. Flame-bound tomes reassembled midair, words reappearing in golden ink. The ember spirits bowed low as they passed. Outside the brazier's gate, they met a traveler, a girl no older than 10, mute from birth, whose eyes widened at the cipher. She reached toward it, and as her fingers brushed its edge, a melody spilled from her mouth, a lullaby in no known tongue, but filled with meaning. "It's rewriting nothing," Elara whispered. "It's translating sorrow into voice." The girl smiled and ran to her family. Already, the cipher was working. But Kalen frowned. "There are others who won't accept it. Those who see emotion as weakness. They'll try to bend the cipher into a weapon." Elara nodded. "We need to protect it, not with walls, but with understanding." They returned to the world's waking edge, where the Concord had established temporary harmonization circles. The canticle was now read openly, sung in ceremonies, its pages copied by scholars. But the news of the cipher's awakening spread too fast. A faction of the Order of the Hollow Tongue, fractured but not extinguished, began seizing villages, claiming they were cleansing corrupted memory. Voris, who had renounced leadership, begged Elara to act. "They think they're restoring purity," he said. "But they're silencing pain again." Elara took the cipher into the central harmonization circle and placed it at the shrine's core. "Then we'll show them what pain becomes when heard," she said. She did not call for soldiers. She called for storykeepers. Messengers spread across the realms, inviting every bearer of memory, singers, poets, dancers, dreamers. When the fractured order marched upon the shrine, they expected resistance. What they found was resonance. Thousands stood not in defense, but in expression. As the attackers approached, Elara stepped forward. She held the cipher aloft, and every person around her shared one memory aloud. A chorus of truth. Some sobbed. Some laughed. Some merely breathed. The order's blades wavered. "We offer no battle," Elara said. "Only honesty. Only remembrance." And the cipher pulsed. It showed each attacker their own hidden memory. Some dropped their weapons. Some fled. Some fell to their knees, breaking not from force, but from recognition. The shrine stood untouched. Yet victory was not without consequence. The cipher, though luminous, now pulsed erratically. It had consumed too much unresolved emotion too quickly. Elara feared it might fracture under the weight of unchecked sorrow. She took it to the verdant reliquary, a living library nestled in the roots of a 1,000-year tree. There, she hoped the ancient sentience of the place could soothe it. The tree listened, rustling its leaves in agreement. For 7 days and nights, Elara remained beneath its branches, weaving harmonics from the canticle into the cipher. It was the hardest task she had ever done, not because of power, but because it required absolute vulnerability. She poured every memory she carried into the weave, including those she had hidden from even herself. On the 8th day, the cipher stabilized. It did not glow now, but shimmered softly, like coals in the dark. It had matured. It would no longer react wildly to emotion, it would amplify connection. When Elara touched it now, she saw not sorrow, but paths through sorrow. And in doing so, she saw something else, an image from the deep echo, a gate of bone and brass, set beneath the drowned ruins of the first city, where the original weave had been spun. The final key to healing the world lay there. Not in song, not in fire, but in stillness. The cipher must return to its birthplace, Kaelin said. Elara nodded. To finish what was never started. The road to the drowned city, Erenvar, was lost to map and myth. Some said it sank due to greed. Others claimed it had tried to bottle memory and drowned in its own hubris. What Elara knew, from the Canticle's oldest pages, was this: it had once been a place where every voice mattered. The world's first harmonization. If the cipher could reweave the weave there, the damage might be undone not by magic, but by remembrance. They began preparations. The world would not follow them this time. This was not a quest of spectacle. It was a descent into the forgotten. Elara, Kaelin, and a handful of soul keepers, chosen not for strength, but for their capacity to carry sorrow, would go alone. One final passage. One final echo. As they gathered at the edge of the sundering sea, Elara felt the cipher hum beside her heart. It no longer feared. It no longer wept. It remembered. She looked across the black waves and saw the shimmer of ancient ruins beneath, waiting like sleeping giants. The sea was silent. Not cursed. Just waiting. She turned to her companions, her voice quiet. Let us descend. Not as heroes, but as listeners. And they stepped into the tide, not to erase the past, but to honor it. The cipher glowed softly. The canticle fluttered. And somewhere in the deep, the first voice of the world stirred, ready to speak again. The water closed above Elara like a whisper sealed behind lips too long silent. She descended not just through depth, but time. The sundering sea, once a channel of trade and memory, now lay draped in silence, hiding the lost city of Erenvar like a secret too sacred to be spoken. Around her, Kaelin swam with slow precision, guiding their small group downward. They wore kelp-spun cloaks, enchanted by the verdant reliquary's own keepers to allow breathe beneath the surface, not lungs, but understanding. Elara didn't breathe air anymore. She breathed meaning. And the meanings here were weighty. Even before they saw the ruins, the water thickened with emotion, sorrow like sediment, ancient guilt suspended like silt. The cipher pulsed against her chest, its light dampened, not extinguished. It's waiting, she murmured through the harmonic link. It knows we've come. The city emerged slowly, arches of coral-encrusted brass, statues leaning like mourners, glyphs etched in stone that no longer meant what they once did. Erenvar had not collapsed in rage or fire. It had sunk with dignity. Its towers stood intact, though blanketed in algae and barnacle. Roads paved in memory crystal still shimmered faintly, casting trails of refracted histories across the ocean floor. The canticle in Elara's satchel whispered, as though each page recognized its birthplace. The others, Kaelin, Vesa the Songmender, Orin of the Hollow Path, and two mute twin interpreters named Lael and Kori, moved with reverence, their motions careful, ritualistic. They passed a shattered gate inscribed with two symbols, one for truth and one for sacrifice. This was where the first voice fractured, Elara said. Where the world chose for getting over forgiveness. The deeper chambers were sealed. Not with walls or spells, but with intent. The city had closed itself when it realized it could no longer bear the weight of every soul's sorrow. But the cipher, held in Elara's hands, vibrated with quiet insistence. When she placed it upon the sigil-inlaid door of the Grand Harmonium, the metal didn't open so much as yield. Water swept past them into a vast, cathedral-like space where gravity no longer held dominion. Memory drifted like motes of dust. Light bent unnaturally. And in the center of the hall floated a throne of books, ink-drained tomes stacked into a seat no one had dared occupy for centuries. Above it hung a veil, shimmering and soundless. The echo's source. "This is where the weave was spun," Kalen said, his voice barely more than a breath. "And where it began to unravel." Elara approached the throne. The cipher trembled, recognizing its twin. The veil above did not react. It merely pulsed, like a heartbeat in sleep. To awaken it, she knew, would not require spells or command. It would require confession. She stepped beneath the veil, and it embraced her mind with unbearable clarity. Memories flooded her, not just her own, but everyone's. The sorrow of the Fade's creator, known only as the Last Weaver, poured into her like floodwater. She saw his hands, once nimble with joy, weaving memory into the world's foundations. She felt the moment he realized too many souls were losing themselves in their griefs, forgetting who they were, or inflicting pain to numb the ache. His solution wasn't malice. It was mourning. He wove the Fade to mute the agony. But it had gone too far. He had vanished into silence. And the veil still carried his grief. To reach him, Elara had to do what no weaver had ever dared, merge her voice with the veil. The others watched in stillness as she sank to her knees before the throne and opened the canticle. She began to read, not aloud, but soulward. The words were not commands, but invitations. "I see you," she intoned inwardly. "I feel what you could not bear." The veil responded. It shimmered, then parted. From behind it emerged not a man, not a shade, but a presence, a flicker of form held together by sorrow. The Last Weaver. He did not speak. He wept. And the tears became echoes that danced through the hall. Elara extended the cipher, not as a solution, but as a bridge. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore," she whispered. The Last Weaver hesitated. In his eyes, if they could be called that, Elara saw eons of guilt. He gestured toward the throne, inviting her to sit. She did. The instant her body touched the ink-bound seat, she became part of the weave. Every thread, every voice, every lost story surged through her being. She was a child watching her father forget her name. She was an old woman whose song no one remembered. She was a scholar whose books turned blank in her hands. But she did not drown. She listened. She bore them. And as she did, the weave began to repair itself, not through force, but acceptance. The Last Weaver stepped back. His form blurred, as if no longer needed. And with a final bow of gratitude, he dissolved into light. The cipher changed in that moment. Its lattice folded inward, then bloomed anew, not as a single shape, but a constellation of connected symbols. It no longer needed to be held. It hovered above Elara, humming with perfect harmonic balance. Kalen stepped forward, eyes wide. "You became the loom," he said. She rose, her face wet with tears, not hers alone. "No," she replied softly. "We all are. I just remembered how to listen." The weave pulsed once, then extended outward. Across the sea floor, through the crystal roads, up the drowned towers, into the sky above. And somewhere, on the world's surface, the stars shimmered brighter, as if echoing a song they had long forgotten. But something else stirred. Deep beneath the weave's roots, a rift opened, a final silence. It wasn't a curse. It was a choice. The Last Weaver had left a fragment of himself buried there, a knot of memory so painful it had resisted even the cipher's light. Elara knew they couldn't leave it untouched. She descended again, alone this time, through a well of stillness. At the bottom was a single image, a cradle. Empty. The weaver had lost a child before the fade. And in his grief, he had vowed no one should remember such pain. Elara sat before it and wept, not just for the child, but for every silence born of love unmet. "We remember them," she said, "even if it hurts." The cradle shimmered, and the knot unraveled. When she returned, the waters above the city had grown lighter, warmer. Fish darted through alleyways. Coral bloomed on rooftops. Erenvar was not restored to what it once was, it had transformed. It no longer hid the weave. It hosted it. The others embraced her silently. No cheers. No triumph. Only quiet unity. They rose together toward the surface, the cipher orbiting gently above them, casting ripples of restored meaning. When they breached the sea, the world had changed. Not visibly, but inwardly. People no longer needed books to know themselves. They remembered through each other. They returned to the harmonization circle once more, but this time Elara did not bring a relic. She brought storytellers. All across the land, the memory bearers gathered, young and old, broken and healing. Each held a fragment of the world's song, and together they began the great reweaving. Not a ritual. Not a war. A telling. And as they spoke, danced, painted, hummed, the weave shimmered above them, knitting itself anew. The cipher no longer hovered at Elara's side. It rested in the air above the circle, visible only to those willing to feel. A star of memory. A promise. Elara stepped back. She had become a listener so long she no longer knew how to live in silence. Yet as the circle thrummed with life, she felt something new, completion. She didn't need to guard the weave. It belonged to everyone now. Kalen took her hand. "What now?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "We walk. And listen. And maybe, someday, forget. But not because we're cursed. Because we lived." She looked up at the stars. They blinked softly, like eyes closing in trust. And far below, in the deepest reach of the echo, where even memory itself once dared not tread, a voice stirred, not in sorrow, but in laughter. The last weaver, freed at last from the burden of silence, joined the chorus of all souls. No longer echoing, simply singing. And the world, at last, could hum along. Seasons shifted across the world like pages gently turned. In the wake of the cipher's awakening, the weave no longer hid in the arcane or ancient, it wove through everyday life. Elara no longer bore the weight of memory alone. Across cities, forests, valleys, and ruins, people remembered, not just in thought, but in connection. A child no longer asked a parent, "What is this?" but, "Who are we?" And the answers were not found in ink or scrolls, but in shared songs, in hands held across generations, in murmured names once buried in silence. The silent fade had not been vanquished, it had been forgiven. Like winter giving way to spring, its passing left room for growth. Elara now wandered the continent as a humble speaker, no longer a seeker of books, but a bearer of stories. And wherever she walked, echoes bloomed behind her. Her journey took her to forgotten places once choked by the fade. The citadel of hollow bells, where no chime had rung in a century, now rang in harmonic procession every dusk, each bell tuned to a name once lost. She walked through the marsh of mired tongues, where voices once tangled and drowned. Now, children swam in the reedlit shallows, singing in 100 dialects that no longer clashed but danced. The cipher, no longer needed as a guide, hovered in the ether, felt but unseen, not as a tool but as a presence. It resided wherever memory turned toward healing. And so did Elara. In the high plains of Cain, she met a boy who had never heard a story. His village had lived through the fade so long that they assumed silence was the natural way. Elara sat by their fire and told him of a city beneath the sea, of a throne made of blank books, of a weaver who mistook sorrow for safety. His eyes lit like sunrise on new snow. By dawn, the boy had crafted his own tale, of birds that nested in forgotten statues, of whispers that taught the wind to laugh. Is it true? He asked. Elara only smiled. If it makes someone feel, it is true enough. That became the mantra of a new generation. Feel it, and you remember. Kalen remained by her side, not as a guardian, but as a companion in purpose. His blades, once honed for defense, now slice fruit for children during tail feasts. Vesa became a keeper of the chorus, a new order of singers who preserved memory not with archives but with harmony. Orin vanished on a path of his own, saying only, "There are memories that belong to Earth now." The twins, Lael and Corey, returned to the peaks of Still Flame, where the silent monks now sang morning hymns. They no longer needed their silence to feel sacred. Their quiet now shimmered with intent, not emptiness. Years passed like braided hair, each strand looping around the last. Elara grew older, but not weaker. Time had marked her, but gently, like the soft folds in a favorite page. In the capital, where once the royal archive stood in dusty mourning, a new hall of whispers rose. It contained no books, only voices. People came to sit and listen, to others, to themselves, to the weave. Elara refused to let them name it after her. "It isn't mine," she said. "It's ours." Still, they carved a statue, not of her face, but of a hand reaching for another. A symbol of what had been healed. But not all places embraced memory. There remained pockets of quiet where sorrow had hardened into denial. A township in the north rejected stories altogether, fearing what they might awaken. Elara visited them, not to argue, but to sit in stillness. Days passed. One evening, an old woman approached, holding a shard of an old lullaby in her hands. She hummed it. Others joined. Tears flowed. Elara left before morning. She understood, now, that silence itself could be sacred, if chosen, not enforced. The world didn't become perfect. But it became aware. Farmers began planting memory seeds, glyph-carved stones that, when buried with intention, sprouted flowers that whispered dreams. Lovers tattooed each other's stories on their skin in luminous ink that glowed with shared laughter. Travelers carried story bottles, releasing echoes in villages that had none. There was pain still, of course. Grief. Anger. Forgetting. But they no longer drowned in it. They wove it into the fabric of life. The weave had taught them not to erase, but to embrace. One winter's eve, Elara stood atop the cliffs of relenting sky, where the first words of the fade had been whispered into existence. The stars above blinked, reflecting the constellation born from the cipher's transformation. She spoke into the wind. "We remember you. We forgive you. We are you." And in return, the breeze carried back laughter, soft, echoing, full. It was the last weaver, now part of everything. "You sang me free," his voice echoed. "And so I sing you forward." As her years waned, Elara returned to her childhood home, the village of moss and ruin where she first heard the books whisper. The library remained reborn. Its walls now hummed with living stories, told nightly by elders and dreamers alike. Elara sat in her favorite alcove, now grown over with ivy that giggled when touched. A small girl crept beside her and whispered, "Tell me a story I've never heard." Elara leaned down and said, "Once there was a silence that thought it could never sing." That night she slept beneath the stars, the cipher humming above her heart. In her dreams she walked among every soul she had ever met, each one leaving behind a word, a note, a thread. She gathered them not for her, but for the weave. In the dream's final moment, a child reached for her hand. "What comes next?" he asked. Elara replied, "You do." And then she woke, briefly, to the soft light of dawn. Then she did not wake again. Elara's passing was not mourned with wails but with echoes. Across the world, people shared a memory of her, not the same memory, but their own. And the weave shimmered, glowing brighter for the loss it now wove into its tapestry. The cipher did not fall. It became mist, spreading through breath, voice, laughter. The world did not lose Elara. It inhaled her. And in every song, every tale, every remembering, she remained. Centuries later, in a village where no one remembers where the fade began, a young child finds a stone shaped like a spiral. He holds it to his ear. A voice, soft and distant, whispers, "Do you hear it?" The child nods, eyes wide with wonder. "Tell me more," he says. And so the weave continues, not as a tale told once, but as a song ever unfolding. Because the cipher of echoing souls was never just an artifact. It was a promise that no voice, once truly heard, is ever lost again.